Welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Editor-in-Chief Hugo Gurdon, and if you're joining us on the Washington Examiner, that's terrific. If you're joining us from YouTube, I would ask you to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's always great to have more of you join us. I'm joined today by Byron York, our Chief Political Correspondent. And Byron, I want to turn to, which is an odd thing in a news way, is that there is a calm at the moment, and it's a newsworthy calm relating to President Trump's transition. As you know, and you wrote about many times in the course of the campaign, there were an endless number of people, it seemed, who were willing to suggest that Trump was literally Hitler and compared him with other fascist leaders. Now those voices are not saying the same thing, which, if those things were ever true, you would think that they would be more alarmed now that he is about to become president. But they don't seem alarmed, so it just suggests that they never really believed it, did they? And do you think they ever did?
For most of them, no. Actually, the whole newsletter that I wrote kind of started with a tweet from Glenn Greenwald, who asked, are any Democrats in Washington acting as if literal Hitler is about to take power and install fascism and a white supremacist dictatorship? I mean, are Democrats acting like that? I mean, when I look at it, they're talking about Trump's nominees, some good, some bad. They're going to oppose some. They're talking about whether there should be one big bill in Congress or two bills in Congress. They're talking about entirely normal transition issues. And they're not talking about fascism about to come to America.
Right.
So what's up with that? One thing I did was I looked back to just a week to 10 days before the election. Kamala Harris, the president's opponent, the current vice president, called Trump a fascist. The former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff called Trump a fascist. A lot of media figures called Trump a fascist. Some journalists and academics called Trump a fascist. Right. So this was actually really spoken a lot at the time.
Right.
And the talk got so crazy that ABC News did a poll, and they asked voters, registered voters, do you think Trump is a fascist? Do you think Kamala Harris is a fascist? Do you think they're both fascist? And the results were really kind of extraordinary, which was that I believe 44% said they thought Trump was a fascist.
Right.
18% said they thought Kamala Harris was a fascist.
Yeah.
And 5% said they thought both of them were fascist, which left only 32% who gave the correct answer, which is, of course, that neither is a fascist. But you had 67% of people polled saying that one or both of the major party candidates were fascist, which to me kind of represents the moment when this whole thing just jumped the shark.
Right.
And fascism had no meaning at all as a term in our political debate.
Right. The crazy talk probably peaked, didn't it, when President Trump held a mass gathering at Madison Square Garden, which we should point out has been used by presidential candidates, for example, Bill Clinton, George Bush. Many have had gatherings there, but Hillary Clinton said that Trump was literally reenacting the 1939 Nazi rally there. Was that the point at which it jumped the shark? Was that the most ludicrous?
Yeah, well, that was in the preview, the run up to the rally. The rally was on October 27th. I was there. It was not a Nazi rally. And in the time that I'm talking about, in which Kamala Harris called Trump a fascist, all these other people did, ABC did the polls, they're all within 3 or 4 days of this rally, in the run-up to the rally on October the 27th. And, of course, there had been, in 1939, a pro-Nazi or Nazi rally held, I think, by the German-American Bund in Madison Square Garden. Mm-hmm. And so this gave all of the people in the resistance a handy image to use, that Trump would be staging his own Nazi rally in Madison Square Garden. And the fact that Hillary Clinton, a former First Lady, former Secretary of State, Democratic presidential candidate in 2016 would say that was really pretty extraordinary. But yeah, this is all part of that fascism jump the shark moment.
Right. Well, so now you see members of the resistance, both those who acknowledge that that's what they are and those who don't, changing their tune, as we say. I mean, a few weeks ago, directly after the election, you saw Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, for example, head down to Mar-a-Lago.
Joe and I went to Mar-a-Lago to meet personally with President-elect Trump.
You've also just saw in the last couple of days, Mark Zuckerberg, head of Meta, saying that things went wrong with Facebook's monitoring and suppressing of some stories.
After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US.
There are all sorts of signs of people trying to make sure that they don't get sideways with Trump, but it also seems to me a bit more than not trying to get sideways with Trump. It's like waking up from a fever dream, and they're trying to actually adjust themselves at least to become approximately related to reality. Wouldn't you see it that way too?
I think you've got a good point there. I would add that we've seen some kind of extreme DEI programs pulled back a little bit in the last few weeks, and we're seeing less wild rhetoric from the left, and there's more acceptance of Trump. And I think the fact that he won the election and he also won the popular vote, not just the electoral vote, but the popular vote, really, I think, caused some members of the resistance, the more thoughtful ones, it caused them to perhaps rethink their positions. And it may just, for others, it may just be a strategic pause. I mean, I have to say, I thought before the election that if Trump won, the resistance would go absolutely crazy. And that at this point, they would be throwing their bodies in front of Trump just to stop him in any way possible from taking office. They'd use the 14th Amendment. They used whatever they could do. And that just hasn't happened at all. Right. Now, there are some Trump supporters who say, like the old cowboy movie, it's quiet, too quiet. So maybe they're out there planning their a surprise attack. But the fact is, it's been a much different transition than I would have predicted before the election.
Right. Well, I entirely agree with that. Let's turn our attention to what's been uppermost in the news just in the last day or two, and that has been President-elect Trump's discussion of American interests in Greenland, in the Gulf of Mexico, which he says he wants to change to the name of to the Gulf of America.
We need Greenland for national security purposes. I've been told that for a long time, long before I even ran. I mean, people have been talking about it for a long time. You have approximately 45,000 people there. People really don't even know if Denmark has any legal right to it. But if they do, they should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. So we're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
How accurate do you see? There's been reporting that that this involves really serious threats to those places, well, to Denmark and Greenland. How much of the threat is real? How much of this is Donald Trump doing what he tends to do, which is to go to a maximalist negotiating position from which he can then make concessions? How do you read it?
Well, I started laughing for a second there because, I mean, part of this is Trump trolling because, there's always, speaking of maximalist, reporters always ask the maximalist question. Like Trump says, I want to buy Greenland. And they say, well, would you use force? To military force to take Greenland? They always say, would you use atomic rockets to destroy Mars? And Trump never rules out anything. He says, no, I can't say I wouldn't do it. And Trump never rules out anything. But it brings to mind, actually, certainly on the Greenland thing, that there are serious reasons for the United States to consider this. And back in 2019, which was in the first Trump administration, Tom Cotton, the Republican senator from Arkansas, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times, back when the New York Times would still publish him. And it was said, we ought to buy Greenland. And it pointed out, by the way, that Harry Truman tried to buy Greenland, made an offer of $100 million, didn't work. And that the reason that the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, was interested in it was that they saw Greenland as a staging ground for Chinese aggression, that the Chinese had tried to purchase a number of airfields and other facilities that could be used for military purposes in Greenland. Denmark, working with the United States, stopped it, but the Trump administration felt they had to kind of scramble to do that.
Right.
And they could see bad things happening in the future.
Right.
So, the idea of buying Greenland, maybe they don't really, you mentioned again, maximalists, maybe they don't really mean that, but they mean establishing a much greater American presence in Greenland to make sure the Chinese don't have that presence.
Right. Well, and one of the things that we've written about at the Washington Examiner repeatedly is the extraordinary distance behind that the United States is behind Russia in its navigation of the Arctic, its possession of icebreakers. There, with global warming, the Arctic waters are more navigable now than they used to be, and this is going to be a theater of strategic rivalry. It already is a theater, and so you can understand why the administration should be thinking about how to establish American authority or control, or at least presence. Even more, it has military bases there now already, but to establish more in Greenland. But I sort of want to leave viewers with a sort of parting thought, and that is that the purchase of Greenland is not only not a ludicrous idea given the current strategy, but the United States has a history of expanding its territory through purchases. The Louisiana Purchase in the early 19th century, the purchase of Alaska from the Russians. This is very much part of what the American history has been. So it's not at all out of the question for the United States to pose this, is it?
No, it's not a crazy idea. And there is a real reason to do it.
Right.
But as I said, I think Trump could be negotiating for a greater American role in defense over there. And when you were talking, I was thinking that Trump has been actually quite forward-looking in terms of American defense. He established the Space Force, right, which you're going to need at some time, and now he's talking about essentially expanding the American perimeter of defense. Which is not a bad idea. So it's not something to laugh at. I sometimes laugh at the way Trump manages to troll the opposition, but it's a serious idea.
Yeah, it certainly is. Byron, thanks very much for joining us today. We'll be back again next week. And thank you all for joining us. As I say, great to see you at thewashingtonexaminer.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We want as big a group of you as possible to join us. Thanks very much indeed.